Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. All right, welcome back to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Well, this week we're going to build on last week's podcast, and this is within a series of theology, wrongful theology, and what we do to help correct that. This week we want to talk about sorting sheep from the wolves. Okay, the Bible uses these analogies, and I know some people are really hesitant. Sometimes scriptures themselves can be triggering. I understand that. I get that. So, we want to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that the Bible often is misused. It's twisted in order to justify abuse. I want to point out to people, whether you believe in God anymore or not, I think it's important to make to call attention to the fact that the Bible really calls out abuse, that there's no tolerance for it, that God is not a God who turns a blind eye to it, right, or that's okay with it, or that calls you to encourage the abusers and to bring them into the church. That's total garbage. That's not at all a biblical concept, and you won't find it.
And I think that was established, Jimmy, way back in the first week that this series was started. Mm-hmm. That, the foundation that was given to us is zero tolerance for abuse.
Yeah.
Zero.
Well, I want to talk about that analogy first, because I think it's such a powerful analogy, and it's used so many times throughout the Bible, both Old and New Testaments. This analogy of the wolf. The wolf who comes in to seek, to destroy. Righteous people or innocent people are often called sheep throughout the Bible. Last week we read from John 10, the passage of the Good Shepherd, where Jesus says, the Good Shepherd lays down at the gate and he protects the flock.
Right.
He's willing to lay his life down for the sheep. And the sheep follow the shepherd because the sheep know his voice and he knows them by name. He knows the sheep by name. On the other hand, the hired hand doesn't protect the sheep whenever the wolf comes in because they're not his sheep. He doesn't care. He walks away and he leaves the sheep to be destroyed. I think this analogy is really powerful, and I think as modern Americans, not just Americans, but we have people listening all over the world, but as modern urban people, I think we really miss the power of that analogy in the Bible.
Well, you figure when this analogy was made, people understood what the shepherd was, who the shepherd was.
There were sheep and shepherds all over Israel.
All over. Today, we don't see that so much because, we've grouped in cities and whatnot, and we've abandoned the hillside except for few. Having grown up on a farm, I mentioned that last week where we did have sheep, I understand real clearly what this is talking about. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a lot of sheep, but I understand the power of the wolf attacking the sheep, believe me, because I saw it with my own eyes. So it makes it easier to understand.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, Jimmy. We need to visualize that and understand what the sheep and the shepherd and the wolf look like together.
Yeah. Well, we'll explain that a little bit because I think it's really important. And I would encourage people to go on YouTube. I mean, you can find videos of wolves actually attacking the sheep. And I think that's important to see what that looks like.
To understand, right.
And why Jesus chose to use that analogy. It's such a perfect analogy. So, I was watching this video, I don't know, this was a while ago, probably 6-8 months ago. And this wolf had come into the pasture, and it was just laying down. It was just chilling out. And it looked so relaxed, and, it was just kind of hanging out. Well, the flock of sheep, they were grazing, and they weren't bothered by this wolf. And it was right there. You couldn't mistake it. They were almost tripping over it to get to the grass that was on the other side of the wolf. And it never moved, and it was just laying there and being calm and, just chilling out. The sheep didn't care. They weren't bothered by it.
They had no fear.
Not at all.
They didn't have their guard up.
It was broad daylight.
Right. So it finished the story here because it gave me chills when you shared that with me. It was so like today's abuser. Yeah. So like exactly what we're talking about. So
it did what predators do. They sit and they wait. And that's why I refer to abusers as predators, because that's what they are. They sit and they wait, and they find an opportune time, and they blend in.
I was just going to say, they wait for that opportunity, but while they're waiting, they're allowing those around them to get very comfortable with them.
Absolutely.
So that they don't have this guard up.
Yeah, I'm not going to hurt you.
Right. Yeah. In fact, they, like you said, just walk all around with the predator right there.
Yeah. So what this wolf did in particular, it waited until the flock was moving away, and then you could see it when their backs were to the wolf. Its ears perked up, and it was on high alert at that point.
It knew it's getting ready,
and it was just watching and staring. And in the very back of the flock was a little ewe lamb, and its mother was just barely in front of it. And as soon as it saw an opportunity, it stood up and it grabbed the ewe lamb and started pulling it away. Well, the mom, of course, she's defenseless. Right. She sees it going on. She sees it happening, but she can't do a thing about it. So she's trying to protect her little baby. And this thing, just that quick, drags this ewe lamb into the bushes out of view of the rest of the flock. There were like 2 sheep in the very back of the flock who noticed. The rest of them didn't even notice. They just kept casually walking forward.
Why would they? Because that wolf created such an atmosphere of safety. He didn't cause any harm.
So that's
until that point.
So that's what the predators do. They come in, they blend in, they pretend, they masquerade. And we were just watching another short clip before we started recording here, and this guy was explaining how in Europe the wolves were creating such a problem and killing so many sheep that farmers were going out and they were killing the wolves. They saw a wolf, they would kill it. Right. Well, that brought the wolves almost to extinction, and this farmer said, it's a problem because they're part of the ecosystem. In nature, you still need your wolves. They're part of the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So you have to protect them to an extent, which gets a little bit tricky. But he said what happened is they were brought almost to the point of extinction, and the government came in and they protected the wolf to try to bring them back. And he said, well, that's all good and fine, because what they used to do is the wolves' natural habitat was up in the high points of the mountains. And they would get the wild animals, the goats and things like that, and they would pick off one at a time. They would kill it. They would eat it.
I'm smiling at Jimmy's terminology. They would pick off. And it's like, go ahead.
So they'd get one goat or whatever they would kill, and then the pack would come and they would all feast on this one goat. And he said, but now that they were brought almost to the point of extinction, they're starting to come back, and the wolves don't travel in packs anymore. So they come where it's an easy kill. So they come into the pastures where all these sheep are. And he said, wolves are incredibly intelligent, so even if you have a really good electric fence up, they're going to find a way in. He said, it doesn't matter what kind of a system you have in place, they're going to find a way in
I
because they're
found
just that intelligent.
So incredible, because as you're translating this picture in your mind to the abuser, we know that that's true. We know that, he or she will find a way in. Okay, keep going there.
So he said now what the problem is that because they're going for easy kill, he said they come into the flock where before they were up on the mountain, they would kill one at a time. Now they come in, and he said it's very easy for one to kill 60 sheep in one night.
Let that sink in, because it really hit me right between the eyes. It really did when I was watching this video with Jimmy. The comparison. Think of your wolf and what happens when that wolf goes into a congregation where
it's easy kill.
200 young children.
Yeah, we've made it really easy for them.
So easy. And
so they're not picking off one at a time where they would on the outside.
Very unnoticeable. Very much so. Or think of that wolf in a daycare or in a school or in a hospital. Think of that setting where that wolf has access to so many. And not just one.
And they're a protected species.
Right.
The wolves are really protected by the church.
That. Right.
And so this it's created an epidemic in Europe. And this farmer was lamenting, and he said, the issue is, what did he call them? I think the title of the video is Bloodthirsty, wolves that have evolved into bloodthirsty predators or something like that. So, they're killing 60 in a night.
Yes. Oh.
Not because they're that hungry.
No.
But because they can.
Because they're available.
And he said, we've put this big buffet right in front of them, and it's easy kill.
The buffet of blood, he called it. Yeah, the buffet of blood.
So they're not going back up in the mountain where they belong, where their natural habitat is, because it's much easier for them just to stay down on the lowlands and to kill off
right in the
60 sheep a night.
And go,
right. They eat until they're satisfied, and then...
If that doesn't give others the chills, like it's giving me, something's wrong. You're not getting it.
Yeah.
I have chills up and down me just thinking.
It's a perfect analogy.
Right,
Jesus was using the perfect analogy, and he used it over and over and over again. Right. But here's the problem that I have too, is that when I use the word wolf to refer to abusers, it's the churches who come back and they're like, "You're being unfair. These are redeemed people. They can be redeemed just like you and I. And, you're saying that there are certain people who can't be redeemed." And, and they go on and on and on. And my answer is, no, I don't say that. God does.
Right.
A wolf is a wolf. Mm-hmm. And I know that a lot of people are asking this question or thinking this, because I get asked this all the time. When I go speak places, this inevitably comes up. And they say, okay, all right, we're tracking with you. Okay. Clearly the Bible often makes a distinction between sheep and wolves. Mm-hmm. There's this sorting process, but isn't that up to God to do that and not us? And if it is up to us, how do we do that? Because if we start calling this person a wolf over here, what's to stop us from calling Grandma Smith over in the third pew? What's to stop us from calling her a wolf? Or what's to stop us from calling the gossip a wolf? And what's to stop us from calling the drug addict a wolf? And on and on and on. So here's the thing. Here's the easiest way to boil this down. All right? A wolf is a wolf to the core, always has been, and always will be.
Right.
A wolf masquerades and pretends to be a sheep. Not so that they can look good and, get accolades because they're prideful and manipulative. But they pretend to be a sheep in order for what?
For easy access to kill and devour.
To kill.
A very, very distinct plan.
Yeah.
To with one purpose in mind.
So these are not your gang members.
No.
These are not your prostitutes. These are not your teenagers who are sexually active. These are not your homosexuals and lesbians in your church. These are not, what else? Your drug addicts, your alcohol addicts. That's not who we're talking about here. Because those people, and this is why the analogy that people use for addictions, to apply that to sex abusers, to pedophilia, that analogy doesn't work. Because I know a lot of addicts. At all. I know a lot of recovering addicts. I know a lot of people who are currently using. The thing with an addict is they don't pretend to be a person of righteousness to get close to people to steal away. Now they steal.
Right. Right.
They do. They steal
and
money.
Deceive, but it's a different kind of stealing and deceiving. Totally different.
They do it because they want to get their next fix.
Right.
They want to get high, or they want to get drunk.
Right.
Because they become addicted to that drug. Now the difference with a pedophile. And I don't like the word sex addict. That has always ground on me a little bit. The thing with an abuser is that they pretend to be such a kind, righteous person, and they do it in order to steal away the innocence and the soul of an innocent and righteous person. That's it. Period.
Right.
They're not doing it because they're addicted to
sex or
sex, or they're addicted to, or they're attracted to children, That's not the issue.
Right.
And here's how I know: if you take away the child from the pedophile, what do you have? You still have a deceptive wolf who's going to masquerade as a person of righteousness, and they're still going to con people and rip them off. Yeah. It may not be with your kid, but it's going to be in some other way. They're going to come up, and they're going to do everything that they can to deceive and to steal something, whether it's a child or whether it's something else. They never stop doing it.
Innocence, power, all of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to read some Bible verses that I think are really important. And this is perhaps one of the most important. And this is in 2 Corinthians 11, 12 through 15. And again, Paul's writing this, and I think it's important to talk about Paul because Paul persecuted Christians, and he became an apostle.
Right.
Was Paul a wolf?
No.
Nope. Never was. No. Never will be.
Right.
Paul's not a wolf. Paul didn't pretend. He didn't pretend to be righteous. He didn't masquerade as a person of righteousness in order to deceive and steal away. Paul, I think I talked about this before. Paul had a pathology, right? Paul's pathology was to please God no matter what. So when Paul was persecuting Christians, Paul honestly and with good conscience thought that he was doing what would please God. He wasn't doing it for self-gratification. He wasn't doing it because he thought it was funny.
Now, that didn't make him right in
Not at all.
doing it.
Not at all.
But his intent wasn't what the wolf's intent is.
And it made Paul teachable.
Right.
Because Paul was a sheep.
It broke his heart to think that he persecuted Christians. Right.
And the other thing, too, this notion of trustworthiness, okay, or trust. I hear this all the time, and it drives me nuts. You can forgive somebody, but that doesn't mean you should trust them. That doesn't even compute in my brain. Okay, I've studied deception long enough. Yeah. That doesn't even compute in my brain. Can you imagine somebody who lies, cheats, robs, steals, and does whatever, where you invite them into your home and you're like, okay, I'm going to love you, but I don't trust you. I forgive you, but I don't trust you. I've got news for you. If you're assigning a chaperone to somebody because they can't be trusted, they've not repented.
No, and it's not going to work. Nothing about that is going to work.
Trust is not gained because of position or authority or anything like that. Trust is gained because somebody is trustworthy.
Yep.
It's trustworthiness. You've proved yourself.
Absolutely.
Over and over and over to be trustworthy.
Absolutely.
I know a lot of recovering addicts. One of them is my very best friend, one of my church members. This is the person who I can tell this person anything. He is the one person in my life who I literally trust with my life. I would give him money. I would give him my car keys. I would do anything for this guy. I trust him with my life, and you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yes.
He is absolutely trustworthy.
Yes.
Because he's proven himself over and over. Because he's a repentant person.
I was going to say his heart did a change. His heart, yes.
He is a repentant person, very humble. I trust him with my life. So for all these people who say, well, we know that they raped kids in the past, but, it's our duty to let everybody in and to give them community, and we're going to assign chaperones and have them sign these confidentiality or these covenant agreements, and we're going to do this and that and that.
Right
not
here,
let them in the children's wing.
Such a contrast to what Jesus was teaching.
Absolutely.
Such a big contrast that it should be like a neon sign flashing in front of us. No, 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 no,
yeah.
no.
If you're developing these policies, I've got news for you. You have a wolf.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a wolf.
You do, yeah.
Okay?
Plain and simple.
And
go back to that picture in that video and the farmer stating, you can put up all the electric wired fences you want, but that wolf will find a way to devour. That wolf will get in.
So what's the electric fence? Your electric fence is your covenant agreement, your chaperones, your written policy.
Right.
He's going to find a weak link. I guarantee it. I guarantee it.
Oh, we know that.
He's going to find a weak link, and he's going to find a way in. And if he's not abusing kids in your church, he's going to be abusing them outside of church hours when you can't monitor him. I can guarantee
He'll be laying still as that wolf, just letting everybody walk around, getting comfortable with him while he's in that setting, getting ready to.
Oh, isn't he so nice? Isn't it nice, the redemption of Jesus? Isn't this wonderful that, look, he had all these victims and went to prison, but now he found Jesus.
Just keep remembering Satan is the great deceiver. Just keep remembering that Satan can come dressed in all kinds of wonderful looking clothing, attitudes and whatnot. This is what we're talking about. Go ahead, Jimmy.
So, can we sort the sheep from the wolves? Absolutely. So here's a passage in 2 Corinthians 11, 12 through 15. Paul says, "And what I'm doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that their boasted mission they work on the same terms as we do. For such men are false prophets, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ." Okay, so it's this, they're deceitful, they're disguising. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants, that is Satan's servants, these are preachers Paul's talking about.
Right.
These are people who are going around preaching the gospel.
Right.
And Paul's calling them servants of Satan. It's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Now, this is the part that's chilling to me. Their end will correspond to their deeds.
And what is that? Death.
Yeah. I mean, Paul's saying the fruits that they bear are evident. You're going to see them. Jesus says it. You will recognize them by their fruit. Jesus calls them ravenous wolves in Matthew chapter 7. And he says twice, you will recognize them by their fruit.
And you spoke, I can't remember which podcast that was, Jimmy, about the fruit and how we recognize the good fruit from the bad fruit.
Yeah.
So this, once again, the analogy, the word pictures, the way Jesus teaches and the way Paul is speaking here, we grasp it. We can understand it.
Acts 20, 28 through 31. Paul's talking to the Ephesian elders at the beach at Miletus. Paul says, pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock, in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. So there's this notion. You're watching over the flock. Keep watch. Pay attention. Stay alert. Watch over the flock. Okay, for what? Well, they would have known, these elders would have known, because they're also called shepherds. They knew exactly what Paul was talking about.
Absolutely.
A shepherd is looking out for one thing. For wolves.
The wolf. Right.
Well, wolves and bears.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever's going to prey on their flock.
Yeah.
Okay? So Paul says, watch out. And then he says, verse 29, I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves will arise men speaking twisted things to draw away disciples after them. Therefore be alert, remembering that for 3 years I did not cease, night or day, to admonish everyone with tears. Okay, so it's this idea of keeping alert, paying attention. How about Peter? This one gives me chills too. This is in 2 Peter 2, and Peter, by the way, is talking about sexual predators in the church who are preachers. And this isn't with children. This is with adults, right? So these are sexual predators who come in, they preach, they masquerade as servants of righteousness when they're not. Listen to how Peter talks about them. He says, for God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. If he didn't spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what was going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despising authority. All right, so clearly, Peter's making a distinction. He's not saying, oh, everybody's a sheep, and Jesus said that if somebody wanders off, you should leave the 99 and go after the one. Peter's not talking about sheep here. Right. Peter's clearly talking about wolves who come in and they masquerade.
I think we get off course, Jimmy, so much of the time because, once again, we're hearing messages constantly. We're being bombarded with it. Love everyone, love all people, accept everything, accept everyone for who they are, be your own person, love them for it. There are distinctions that have been made. There are foundational distinctions that God made.
And I don't think they're that confusing.
No, not at all. But we make it that way because we have muddied our thinking up so much by the idea that we must love and forgive everyone. Mm-hmm. They're not those who are seeking to devour.
Well, tell me how much, tell me how much love and forgiveness Peter has when he says this. Tell me how much grace is sprinkled in this. Because listen to what he says. Bold and willful, okay? They're bold and willful. They're willing this to happen. They know what they want, and they're going to take it, period.
Right.
Bold and willful, they do not tremble as they blaspheme the glorious ones, whereas angels, though greater in might and power, do not pronounce a blasphemous judgment against them before the Lord. But these, talking about these wolves, these guys who are sexual predators, who are preaching, but these, like irrational animals, creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed, blaspheming about matters which they are ignorant, will also be destroyed in their destruction, suffering wrong as the wage for their wrongdoing. They count it pleasure to revel in the daytime. They are blots and blemishes, reveling in their deceptions while they feast with you. So, They have eyes full of adultery, insatiable for sin. They entice unsteady souls. They have hearts trained in greed, accursed children. Okay, so, and he's not done yet. He keeps going on and on and on.
By the way, interjected a little. He grabbed my hand that was rubbing on my leg here. It's a nervous thing that I was doing because honestly, I was thinking of your dad and the way he deceived me. He deceived your kids. He deceived the church. He deceived our community. He deceived everyone. He was such a kind, patient, came across as loving person, giving, servant type of person. There was no ever any fear or distrust of him. All the while, he was abusing children.
Under our own roof, too.
Yes.
I mean,
in our very home, in the very church where we worshiped, within the community where we lived. And when I think about that, I shudder. I really do, Jimmy.
Yeah.
I truly do. He is an example of a wolf.
And if you would talk to him, you would, I mean, your guard would come down. Yes. And I can't even begin to describe. You've not visited him since he's been in prison.
I have not. No.
I've been there multiple times. And every single time that I go in, I mean within minutes, any guard that I had up just comes crashing down. And he has a way of
disarming. He really does.
Yeah, of making you feel at home, of making you feel comfortable. Yeah. So all this stuff, when researchers talk about them, they're so manipulative. Well, yeah, they are, but what does that look like? Like, I want to know what that looks like. It's something that until you experience it, you wouldn't believe it to be true.
Well, that's why my whole body right now is just so tense. I really am thinking about it. I think I'm semi-intelligent. I can read people pretty well. I had no clue. I couldn't read him. He was that wolf laying in the pasture among the sheep.
As they're grazing by his belly,
Right. He is that one who snatched away the child from the mother. He is
as the rest of the flock walks on and doesn't even notice.
Took no notice whatsoever. Jesus had a reason he called these abusers wolves. He had a reason. It's horrible. And you will be deceived. You must pay attention. You must separate the wolf from the sheep.
Yeah.
And that's why Jimmy and I are so passionate about these lessons here in this podcast.
Yeah, there is never a question in Scripture. Never, ever, ever, ever have I found an example where somebody's identified as a wolf and the Bible says, but invite them in.
Right. I was going to say you will never read the word invite, never hear the word invite the wolf in.
You'll hear words like this, though. Avoid. Paul says that in 2 Timothy chapter 3. Avoid such people.
Beware.
Be on guard. Be looking out. Paul says other places.
Using that word constantly. Never let your guard down. It's a constant thing.
Well, and Peter, we'll close with this because, he just cranks it up. He has no patience, no tolerance for them. He says they revel, they count it pleasure to revel in the daytime. That's how they derive their pleasure. They do it right in broad daylight, right in front of other people, while they feast with you. Right. They sit at the table, eating with the very lambs that they're about to devour, while they're making best friends with the shepherd, saying, hey, isn't this wonderful?
And that is exactly how it's done.
So those are the people who the Bible's talking about who are wolves. They masquerade, they pretend in order to deceive and steal away, and they revel in it. They love it. They love coming right up in broad daylight and doing this stuff right in front of other people and getting away with it. But then he goes on, I'll end with this, verse 17. Peter says, these, talking about these wolves, they're waterless springs and mists driven by a storm. For them, the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved. For speaking loud boast of folly, they entice by sensual passions of the flesh those who are barely escaping from those who live in error. They promise them freedom, but they themselves are slaves of corruption. Does that sound familiar to any of you who've been trafficked, any of you who've been abused, where there's this promise of, I'm going to care for you, I'm going to protect you. They promise you freedom.
Right. I'll love you.
And they entice you, they bring you in of
right.
people who are barely escaping. They're the ones who the wolves come in. They bring them under their wing, under their arm. They promise them freedom and protection, and they do it in order to steal from them, right. To steal away, to destroy them. So Peter says, for if after they've escaped the defilements of the world through the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, for the last state has become worse for them than the first. It would have been better for them to never have known the way of righteousness than after knowing it to turn back from the holy commandment delivered to them. What the true proverb says has happened to them. The dog returns to its own vomit, and the sow, after washing herself, returns to wallow in the mire. There's no talk of rehabilitation, of kindness, of community, of bringing them into the church.
I think that word community is so important for all of us to remember. No invitation in. No invitation.
You won't find it.
No.
You won't find it.
No.
So our truth bomb for today is just to make sure that you're able to clearly distinguish who the wolves are, who people are who masquerade and pretend to be children of righteousness, but who behind the scenes are very abusive. There's a radical difference between them and people who get caught up in a sin and who wrestle with sin. There's a very clear distinction made in the Bible. And it's not that gray. I think it's pretty black and white.
It is.
So know who they are, and if you don't have shepherds who are willing to protect the flock, remove those shepherds. They're not shepherds.
For sure.
Remove them. Find a way to have them removed. If they're inviting wolves into your church and allowing them to produce more victims, get rid of those shepherds and find people who would genuinely guard and protect the flock. Well, thank you for joining us this week, and we'll catch you next podcast. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.